Some journeys can change your destiny. Others change the way we see the world. This is one of them. Norway, a journey from north to south. Episode 1: The far north and northern Norway. Few places on the planet inspire as much fascination as Nordkapp, a rocky promontory that juts out over the barren sea and symbolizes the northernmost point of Europe accessible by road. These immense cliffs began to take shape during the Ice Ages, when the advance and retreat of the ice carved one of the most impressive landscapes in the Norwegian Arctic. The famous metal globe has become a landmark for travelers from all over the world, representing the meeting point between the European continent and the vastness of the Arctic Ocean. Even during the summer, the feeling of isolation remains intense, because beyond these cliffs, there is nothing but open sea stretching toward the North Pole. Reaching this point is less about arriving at a geographical coordinate and more about experiencing the rare sensation of standing before one of the planet's most iconic habitable frontiers. Just a few miles away, Skarsvåg preserves the everyday life of one of the northernmost fishing villages in the world, where the sea remains at the center of the community's life. While thousands of visitors make their way toward the North Cape, this small harbor reveals a quieter side of the Arctic, shaped by fishing traditions and constant coexistence with extreme nature. In Finnmark, winter transforms mountains, fjords, and plains into an immense Arctic landscape, where snow dominates the horizon for much of the year. Despite the extreme latitude, the influence of the Barents Sea helps keep part of the coast ice-free, allowing small communities to remain connected to the ocean even during the coldest months. The roads that cross this region face powerful winds, snowstorms, and long periods of darkness, making every journey a demonstration of human adaptation to the polar environment. Among silent valleys and sheltered coves, Finnmark reveals a way of life shaped by nature, where isolation is part of the daily routine and the landscape determines the rhythm of the seasons. But northern Norway is not all about ice. When autumn arrives, the landscape transforms into a mosaic of golden tones, revealing a completely different side of this Arctic territory. It is in this setting that Sylfar Canyon emerges as one of Finnmark's lesser-known gems, carved by the Burselva River over thousands of years since the end of the last ice age. The incredibly clear waters take on greenish hues thanks to minerals found in the rocky riverbed, creating a striking contrast between the river and the canyon walls. Despite its wild appearance, Sylfar Canyon remains far from the major tourist routes, preserving an environment where silence is interrupted only by the constant sound of flowing water. Few people imagine that beyond glaciers, fjords, and tundra, the far north of Norway is also home to gorges like this, reminding us that the region's nature is far more diverse than it may seem at first glance. Hammerfest proves that even above the Arctic Circle, life flourishes around a harbor that has connected the far north of Norway to the maritime routes of the Barents Sea for centuries. For a long time, the city was known as one of the northernmost settlements on the planet, becoming a symbolic destination for explorers and travelers drawn to the grandeur of the Arctic. The globe monument, facing the harbor, marks one of the vertices of the historic Struve geodetic arc, a network of measurements that helped 19th century scientists accurately determine the size and shape of the Earth. Among mountains, fjords, and waters that remain navigable throughout much of the winter, Hammerfest reveals how a city can thrive in one of Europe's most extreme inhabited environments. The Varanger Peninsula is home to one of Norway's most impressive scenic routes, where the road stretches for roughly 160 kilometers between Varangerbotn and the old fishing village of Hamningberg. Along the way, the Arctic tundra extends until it meets the Barents Sea, creating an almost lunar landscape shaped by ice, wind, and time. As the road advances toward the northeasternmost part of Norway, wetlands, small birch forests, and rocky shores reveal how nature constantly changes in an environment with a harsh climate. The proximity to the Russian border has also left its mark on the local identity, where Norwegian heritage coexists with Sami and Finnish influences that help define the culture of this remote region. In Trollholmsund, along the shores of the Porsanger Fjord, curious white dolomite formations rise among the coastal rocks, the result of geological processes that sculpted this landscape over hundreds of millions of years. The unusual appearance of these pillars inspired an ancient Sami legend, according to which a group of trolls was turned to stone when the first rays of sunlight reached the coast. Today, Trollholmsund is one of Finnmark's most unique natural spots, where geology, tradition, and the Arctic environment come together in a setting as rare as it is fascinating. Bugøynes is a small fishing village on the shores of the Varanger Fjord, where the rhythm of life remains deeply connected to the cold waters of northeastern Norway. Known as Little Finland, the community preserves strong roots in Kaven culture, inherited from Finnish immigrants who settled in this region generations ago. The waters around the village have also become one of Norway's main destinations for king crab fishing, a species that now plays an important role in the local economy. Bugøynes reveals a peaceful side of the Arctic, where tradition, nature, and isolation coexist in perfect harmony. On the outskirts of Kirkenes, the traditional gam cabins at the Snow Hotel were inspired by the ancient dwellings once used by the Sami people, reinterpreted to offer a comfortable experience in the heart of the Arctic environment. With roofs covered in vegetation and snow during the winter, these structures blend naturally into the landscape, preserving the aesthetic and spirit of northern Norway. When night falls, the cabin's subtle lighting highlights the silence of the forest and creates a setting designed for observing one of the Arctic's greatest spectacles, the Northern Lights. Staying here means experiencing winter far beyond the cold, surrounded by snow-covered landscapes, frozen lakes, and the unique atmosphere of the Kirkenes region. Leaving the far north of Finnmark behind, the journey continues through northern Norway to Tromsø, the largest city in the Norwegian Arctic and one of the main urban centers above the Arctic Circle. Spread across islands, fjords, and mountains, Tromsø combines modern life with a strong tradition linked to polar expeditions that departed from here towards some of the most unexplored regions of the planet. As the sun approaches the horizon, golden light reflects across the harbor and fjords, while Tromsø switches on its first lights, revealing one of the most enchanting urban landscapes in the Arctic. The Tromsø Bridge, opened in 1960, became one of the city's great symbols by connecting the urban center to the island where the famous Arctic Cathedral stands. Between September and March, the combination of dark skies, favorable weather, and low light pollution makes Tromsø one of the world's most renowned destinations for observing the northern lights. In summer, the phenomenon completely reverses, and the midnight sun remains above the horizon for several weeks, transforming the rhythm of the city and revealing a new side of life in the Arctic. A few minutes from Tromsø, the island of Kavaloya reveals a much wilder side of the Arctic, where mountains, fjords, and snow-covered plains dominate the landscape. Its name itself means Whale Island, a reference to the historic presence of these giants of the sea in the waters surrounding the region. Among its best-known landscapes is Grotfjord, a small fjord surrounded by steep mountains, where a quiet village seems to find shelter between the sea and the snow. During the winter, snow-covered trails and silent valleys transform Kavaloya into one of the region's main destinations for hiking, skiing, and direct contact with Arctic nature. Even so close to the largest city in northern Norway, Kavaloya preserves the sense of isolation that makes this region one of the most impressive places in the entire Arctic. At the western edge of the Tromsø region, Sommerøy forms a small archipelago, where islands, bridges, and sandbars come together in one of the most unique coastal landscapes in northern Norway. The shallow, crystal-clear waters contrast with the mountains in the background, creating a landscape that is surprising for resembling destinations much farther south, even though it lies above the Arctic Circle. The connections between the islands make it possible to explore the archipelago by road, revealing small fishing communities that preserve a way of life deeply connected to the sea. Throughout the year, Sommerøy shows that the Arctic can also be defined by white sand beaches, tranquil coves, a nature of unexpectedly delicate beauty. The island of Senja brings together some of the most impressive landscapes in the north, where deep fjords and rugged mountains have earned it the nickname Miniature Norway. Among its most famous landmarks is Segla Peak, an imposing granite monolith that has become one of the country's most photographed mountains because of the way it rises above the fjord. Scattered along the coast, small fishing villages preserve a way of life that has depended for centuries on the cold waters of the sea and the abundance of fish that reach the region. In Husøy, a small island connected to Senja by a causeway, almost the entire community is concentrated on a single piece of land, surrounded by the ocean, creating one of the country's most unique coastal landscapes. The cold, oxygen-rich waters of Senja's fjords also support one of the most important activities in the Norwegian economy: Atlantic salmon farming in large marine farms. The Lyngen Alps form one of the most impressive mountain ranges in northern Norway, where snow-covered peaks rise abruptly from the shores of the fjords. The presence of dozens of glaciers and valleys carved by ice makes this peninsula one of the most sought-after destinations for mountaineers, skiers, and lovers of Arctic nature. On the shores of the Lyngen Fjord, Oldedalen has become an important crossing point between northern communities, where ferries cross waters surrounded by the imposing Lyngen Alps. Amid the snow, the Red Church of Oldedalen recalls the rebuilding of the region after World War II, when the community itself joined forces to build a symbol of hope that still stands today. The Svartisen Glacier is home to one of the largest masses of ice in mainland Norway, shaping these mountains and valleys long before the first inhabitants arrived in the region. The glacier's most famous arm, known as Engabrin, advances toward a turquoise lake whose color is produced by extremely fine rock particles carried by the melting ice. Even during the summer, the ice remains in constant motion, slowly advancing and retreating over the years as natural climate variations occur. The Gorsabrua suspension bridge crosses a canyon about 154 meters deep, offering a privileged perspective of the powerful Gorsa waterfall, which plunges between rock walls carved by melting ice. Over thousands of years, the force of the water carved a narrow fissure into the mountain, transforming this valley into one of the most impressive natural landscapes in northern Norway. For those seeking even more adrenaline, crossing the bridge can end with a bungee jump over the canyon, in one of the most extreme experiences offered amid Norway's Arctic landscapes. Among all the landscapes Norway has to offer, few inspire as much admiration as Lofoten, an archipelago that has transformed its mountains, fjords, and fishing villages into one of the most famous postcards on the planet. Svolvær, the main town of Lofoten, grew around cod fishing and remains the main gateway to one of the country's most iconic destinations. The busy harbor brings together fishing boats, marinas, and expedition vessels, preserving a maritime tradition that has sustained life among these islands for centuries. High above the town, the rocky pinnacle of Svolværgeita challenges climbers from around the world, becoming one of the best-known natural landmarks in the entire archipelago. Among snow-covered mountains, crystal-clear waters, and old wooden buildings along the waterfront, Svolvær offers the first glimpse of the landscape that has made Lofoten one of the most photographed places in Norway. In the historic village of Kabelvåg, Vågen Church, known as the Lofoten Cathedral, was built to accommodate the thousands of fishermen who arrived in the archipelago during the cod fishing season. Long before Lofoten became one of Norway's most sought-after destinations, Kabelvåg was already an important fishing center, and this church remains one of the greatest symbols of that centuries-old heritage. Henningsvær is one of the most famous fishing villages in the Lofoten Islands, spread across small islands connected by bridges that seem to float between the sea and the mountains. Few places in the world have such an unusual soccer field, built on a narrow strip of rock and surrounded by the ocean in almost every direction. For centuries, cod fishing shaped the lives of the local residents, and many of the traditional rorbuer, the famous fishermen's cabins, now preserve this heritage while welcoming visitors from around the world. During the summer months, the nearly endless daylight transforms the archipelago into a vibrant setting, revealing crystal-clear waters and small islands that seem scattered at random across the Norwegian Sea. When winter arrives, the landscape changes completely. Snow covers rooftops, bridges, and mountains, while the lights from the houses create small refuges of warmth amid the harshness of the Arctic. Even surrounded by such an extreme environment, Henningsvær continues to demonstrate how tradition, nature, and everyday life can coexist in perfect harmony in the heart of Lofoten. At the southernmost end of the Lofoten Islands, Reyne, Hamnøy, and Sakrisøy form a group of small villages that has transformed this region into one of the most iconic and photographed destinations in all of Norway. The traditional rorbuer, built on stilts along the water, were originally constructed to house fishermen during the cod fishing season, allowing boats to dock practically at the door of each cabin. The red color also has a historical explanation. For centuries, it was made using iron oxide pigments mixed with fish oil, a durable, inexpensive solution ideal for withstanding the harsh Arctic climate. Over time, these simple working homes became one of the country's greatest postcards, preserving traditional architecture while welcoming travelers from around the world. Even surrounded by mountains that seem to rise directly from the ocean, Reyne is home to only a small community, where the pace of life still follows the tides and fishing seasons. Few people imagine that despite its international fame, the village maintains the peaceful atmosphere of an old fishing community, where tradition and everyday life remain part of the same landscape. when the sea remains completely calm. The mountains, Rorbuir and sky are reflected in the water like a mirror, creating one of the most striking images of the entire journey through the Lofoten Islands. Nusfjord is considered one of Norway's oldest and best preserved fishing villages, keeping alive the atmosphere that defined the golden age of cod fishing in the Lofoten Islands. Around the small harbor, old warehouses, docks, and carefully restored Rorbuer preserve the traditional architecture that sustained generations of fishermen facing the Norwegian Sea. Today, walking through Nusfjord is like stepping back in time into a rare place where historical heritage remains integrated with the landscape and daily life of a small coastal community. Unstad is surrounded by steep mountains and a wide stretch of sand facing the North Atlantic, creating a landscape that surprises by bringing green fields, open sea, and rocky peaks together on the same horizon. The waves reaching the bay have transformed this small village into one of the Arctic's most famous surfing destinations, attracting surfers from around the world even when water temperatures approach freezing. Few people imagine that farming is also part of Unstad's identity, where small farms stand alongside the ocean and preserve a traditional way of life passed down through generations. The crystal-clear waters of Haukeland Beach create such an unlikely contrast with the mountains of the Lofoten Islands that many visitors feel as though they are looking at a tropical beach, despite being above the Arctic Circle. The white sand and emerald blue waters owe their colors to the combination of the shallow seabed, exceptionally clear water, and the distinctive light of the high latitudes. Even when the wind blows cold, Haukeland invites hikers, photographers, and adventurers to explore one of Norway's most impressive coastal landscapes. The hike to Mount Ryton is considered one of the most iconic trails in the Lofoten Islands, combining an accessible route with one of the most breathtaking views in the entire archipelago. From the summit, Kvalvika Beach reveals a hard-to-believe landscape where almost vertical mountains protect a stretch of white sand washed by the cold waters of the Norwegian Sea. For centuries, Kvalvika remained isolated, accessible only by sea or by trails through the mountains, preserving a landscape that has remained virtually untouched by urbanization. It is precisely this contrast between imposing cliffs, crystal-clear sea, and tropical-looking beaches that makes Ritten one of the most photographed and sought-after viewpoints for those visiting Lofoten. Trollfjord is one of the most impressive fjords in the north, famous for its narrow entrance that seems to conceal a world surrounded by enormous rock walls. In some sections, the passage is just over 100 meters wide, while mountains rising more than 1,000 meters high tower almost vertically above the calm waters. Far beyond the beauty of the landscapes, bridges such as Gimsøystraumen have transformed the way of life in Lofoten, connecting islands that for centuries depended almost entirely on the sea. Traveling along the E10 highway means crossing one of Norway's most scenic routes, where every turn reveals a new encounter between mountains, fjords, and the Arctic Ocean. From the top of Offasoykammen, the Lofoten Islands reveal their full grandeur, where mountains, fjords, and the ocean come together in one of Norway's most striking landscapes. After crossing fjords, villages, and mountains in the far north, all it takes is one final look to understand that, in Lofoten, the landscape itself transforms the journey into a lasting memory.